What does God say to us when we have truly blown it? I'm not talking about a moment, a choice, an action, but a lifestyle, a condition, a direction. When we have messed up our lives and the lives of others, when we've wounded and injured even the people we love the most, when it's not a slip-up but a blow-up, what does God say to us? Because the reality is such moments create shame, and sometimes profound shame, and shame is extremely difficult for us to face and to deal with. In fact, I read a story just recently, story of a family that was wanting to write something of a biography of their family, not to be published widely, but for their own family members and their own friends. But they had an uncle, Uncle George, who he had really made a disaster of life. Had actually committed murder, had ended up in prison, and had finally been executed by the electric chair in the state where they lived. They didn't know how to deal with Uncle George's story. They were afraid that if they told the full story as it was, it would bring shame on the family name. So they talked to somebody who was known for craft and for writing. Person said, "No problem, tell me the story. I'll tell it in a way that will make a positive impact." So they did, and this is what he sent back to them about the little piece that was going to tell Uncle George's story. Uncle George occupied a chair of applied electronics at an important government institution. He was attached to his position by the strongest of ties. His death came as a real shock. So, we can try to hide our shame behind wording and language and other wrappings that make it look good from the outside, but at the core, we still know the shame of our lives. It was illustrated to me in a story told by the late Lewis Smedes, professor of theology and ethics down at Fuller Seminary. In his book, Shame and Grace, he tells the story that comes apparently out of the USSR and back in the Stalinist days. It's called the theory of the Mongolian peasant. So it was that some years after all of this happened, a psychologist, a writer, journalist, that kind of person, went to Russia to try to find out how was it that you controlled the people? How was it that you would get people to confess to things they hadn't even done? He interviewed a psychologist who had worked with the regime and said, "I operated on the basis of the Mongolian peasant." What in the world is that? He says, here's how it works. So there's a man, poor man, large family, struggling to get by. But he's done something that the regime wants to deal with, wants to get rid of him. And so they call him in. He goes into this massive office, high ceilings, plush carpets, thick drapery on the window, huge mahogany desk, behind which is seated a steely-eyed general, crisp uniform. All the decorations and ribbons on his chest indicate just how important a man he is. He calls the poor man to the front of his desk, and he says to him, as he pulls out from his drawer a huge stack of bills, he says to him, "I have here 1,000,000 rubles to give you. Just think of what a difference this could make in your family. You would be able to eat with no problem, clothe yourselves. You would be able to live in much better quarters. It would secure your future. 1,000,000 rubles, you can leave with it here today. All you have to do is press this red button." The man looks at the red button with fear in his eyes. "What happens when I press the red button?" He says, "When you press the red button, thousands of miles from here, in Mongolia, a Mongolian peasant will drop dead. Won't be painful. It'll be swift, sudden, without warning. He'll be gone. And you will go home with the rubles." Well, the poor man stands there, debating within himself, deliberating, realizing how this money could change his family's life. And so finally he pushes the red button. He takes the money, he goes home, and said the psychologist to the foreign person, correspondent, and we wait. This time it took 5 years. 5 years later, he committed suicide. Then we went to his home, searched it, And underneath the bed, we found the stack of 1 million rubles intact. We took it and got it ready for the next one. And the psychologist said, we operated on the assumption that every single one of us has a Mongolian peasant moment. That moment when we have, for our own good, for our own ease, for our own comfort, for our own desires, for our own whatever, done damage to someone else. Sometimes deep damage. And it has never left us. And all it takes is somebody dangling a name, running into a person, remembering an event, that the shame overwhelms and we are crippled. That, he said, is how we got people to confess even to things they had never done. So my question this morning is very simple. What does God say to those moments? Those moments in our lives when we are crippled by shame. Addiction. Continue to slip the pill to our cheek. Continue to secretly and surreptitiously gamble away the money we earn. Click on the websites that support the porn industry. An affair, a choice, a lie, a theft. I don't know what your Mongolian peasant is. But there's somewhere in your life that which when you slow down long enough to think about it, such as when you enter into a worship space hoping to encounter God, that you suddenly think, what does God say when my life has been destroyed, when there's nothing much left, when outwardly I look fine and inwardly I'm collapsing? What does God say? Well, today, continuing our series, Anonymous, takes us to the story of an anonymous thief that I want to suggest to you has the answer to our question. We go to Luke's Gospel, chapter 23, recognizing that in this chapter it's execution day. Jerusalem is pregnant with pilgrims in for the Passover. It is a powder keg of emotion. The Roman guard in the Antonia fortress knows they must keep a careful eye, powerful guard on everything that happens, or the entire city could go up in flames. But today there will be an execution. In fact, not one, not two, but three. The principal one will be that man, that teacher, according to Rome, according to the religious rulers, that rabble-rouser who is a threat to the systems both of religion and of the empire. He will finally be dealt with. And two others with him. When we read the story in a moment, it will say that the people came to watch. Actually, a nuance in the Greek word there is that they came to stare, to watch carefully. What is it about human nature that is enthralled with the most grim and macabre of spectacles? We all do it. The fatality on the freeway, and we all slow down and leer out the window. That was Jerusalem, with the teacher and the criminals. Now, the criminals are described by two different words. Matthew and Mark tell the story. They use one word. Luke tells the story. He uses a different word. If you look at both words, they could be translated in a range of ways. Robbers, thieves, brigands, insurrectionists. The bottom line is that both of these are not accidental moments. These are lives out of control. Lives of shame. Lives that have led now to this moment of extremity. So we begin reading Luke chapter 23, verse 32. Two other men, both criminals, were also led out with him. Him is Jesus. Were also led out with Jesus to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, staring. And the rulers even sneered at him. They said, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, if you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was a written notice above him which read, this is the King of the Jews. The rabble mock him, throw insults his direction. They are intent on not only executing the three, but particularly the man in the middle, they are intent on humiliating him. The Roman guard mocks, the religious rulers mock, and interestingly, it is on that mockery that both of the thieves will pick up. So now for a moment, our eyes turn to the thieves. Who are these two? And in particular, who is this one on whom the text will elaborate? Well, first thing we know is they are anonymous. We don't know their names, we don't know their stories, their histories, their genealogy, what profession they might have worked in. We don't know. But as one commentary puts it, that does not keep history from being busy with their story. Because the stories have persisted throughout history of what is said to have been the case. The penitent thief is given names, for example, Didymus by some, Dumachus by others. Some say, oh, he was a Robin Hood, robbed from the rich, gave to the poor. Maybe the most beautiful story that has endured for centuries is the story of a young family fleeing to Egypt. The stepfather, Joseph, awakened by a vision where he is told, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt to escape Herod's grim grasp. And that on the way to Egypt, they are attacked by a band of robbers. The son of the chief of the band notices the child and is struck by the child's beauty, is able to save the child and his parents, and then says to the child, beautiful child, today I have saved you. Should there ever come a time when I need your salvation, remember me. It's a beautiful story, but it's legend, tradition. Could it have happened? Possibly. But they're anonymous. This thief is anonymous. We don't know much. However, we do know that of all the epithets, all of the insults slung around that day, there was one that for some reason, clear reason, connected with both of the criminals. And they will end up in a conversation, if you call it such, about that epithet. Now, first of all, before talking about the conversation, please understand that to even enter into conversation of any kind would have come at the cost of great pain. You see, crucifixion was designed to hold the victim in the kind of position that would slowly suffocate the victim. Now, there was often a block at their feet, which if they could endure the pain, if their feet were nailed, of pushing up, it could allow them to get a breath. Or if they could pull themselves up by their arms to get a breath, to extend the suffering. That's what it would have cost to be able to have a conversation at sufficient volume that in the midst of the cacophony of the crowd, the conversation could be heard. But they do converse. And this is what sparks it. Back to Luke 23. I want to read 3 verses. They're starting with verse 35. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. It is that mockery, that insult, if you are the Messiah, save yourself, that somehow connects. And so the first thief will speak. Understand what comes from him comes out of anger, comes out of not a repentant heart, but a desire to save his skin. Today is the day to walk the plank, to pay the piper, to face your past. And he is saying, I don't want to do any of that. I want to save my skin. And so here's what he says, verse 39. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. He picks up on the same insult. What kind of Messiah are you? A Messiah who hangs on a cross? A Messiah who dies? What kind of weakness is that? And as though to prick his heart to action, he says, if you're the Messiah, save yourself and us in the process. Get us off of these crosses. He's not the only one to speak. The other criminal speaks as well. But it comes from a very different place. He speaks not out of anger, but out of need. Not to mock, but to request. Verse 40. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you're under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He begins with three things. First, he reprimands his colleague in crime. His comrade, he confronts him. Why are you confronting him? Why are you saying these things to him? What are you doing? He confronts his colleague. Secondly, he comments on justice. It's as though he said, look, when we started down this pathway, we knew the strength and the might of Rome. We knew the ruthlessness of what Rome will do to criminals. We understood that. We chose the pathway anyway. So to end up in this place is no surprise. We are getting, now admittedly, this is Roman justice in the first century, but he's saying we are getting what our deeds deserve. We are facing justice. Reprimands his colleague, comments on justice, and then he comments on injustice. But, he says, this man has done nothing wrong. Injustice. The question is, how did he know that? Had he listened to the stories that were spreading around the countryside about this teacher who said such beautiful things about God? Had he listened to the tales, maybe even from the lips of those who had experienced the healings, of the blind seeing, the deaf hearing, the mute speaking? Is that what had led him to that conclusion? Or had he watched the events unfold this day? Had he seen the teacher from Galilee on the Via Dolorosa, on the way to Calvary, as he looked at the women and said, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves because of what's coming on this city. Had he seen in the midst of all the torture, all the abuse, all the mocking, all the insults, had he seen a certain dignified, regal bearing? Had he viewed and listened as they were nailing him to the cross, as he prayed, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. What was it that allowed this anonymous criminal to be able to speak with such clarity when no one else could, either because of revenge on their minds or because of fear for their lives? To speak out on that day and to say, he has done nothing wrong. He's innocent. We're here because of what we did. He, however, is innocent. And then, Could he turn enough to see Jesus? Because then he speaks. He says, Jesus, remember me. Remember me. I've had the sacred privilege, because of the profession I'm honored to give my life to, of sitting with more than a few people as they come to the end of their life's journey. Many times in my chaplaincy years, on occasion in my pastoral years. And I have been struck, deeply struck, by the differences in how people come to that moment of ultimate extremity. And much of it seems to have to do with whether or not there is this sense that this anonymous thief has of being remembered positively by Jesus. It's been not that long ago, a few years ago. I had the privilege of sitting with someone from this congregation. This congregation who was 2-3 days away from their death. On that day, they were remarkably alert. We had a beautiful conversation. We talked. The conversation meandered without any hurry or speed to different themes. There finally came a moment, kind of a break, when it seemed appropriate, nothing forced. And I just said to this person, tell me, how's your soul? This person actually chuckled, smiled, and said, my soul is good. Jesus is with me. I'm at rest in Him. And over that, I have no fear. What a moment to say that. It took me back many years before when, as a chaplain, I accompanied somebody on a long journey over weeks and some months. Somebody who had grown up with a dastardly view of God, because of which was petrified of death. Despite conversations and trying to say, you know, He loves you. He wants you to be His forever friend. You can be at peace. I'm not sure this person was ever able to grasp that. Died in great emotional turmoil. No wonder. No wonder this thief, in his waning moments of life, and make sure you understand, waning moments is exactly what it is. He has an hour, 2 hours, it's almost gone. No wonder in his waning moments of life, he says, Jesus, remember me. When you're in your kingdom, remember me. Remember that I hung by your side. Remember that I long for your touch. Remember that I asked for your peace. Remember me. And Jesus responds, verse 43. Jesus answered him, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Whatever else you think as a first thought, I hope this is your first thought. That is a statement of assurance, of forgiveness, of the peace of God over a life of shame, a life of disaster, a life that ended up executed by the state. That is a statement that says, I will remember you. You are forgiven. You will be in my kingdom. Don't miss that. Now, Seventh-day Adventists, we've sometimes struggled with this passage because we believe that when we go to our rest, that we rest, that we sleep until Jesus awakens us for his kingdom. So we've wrestled with this. What's he saying today? We've talked about the fact that in the original language there is no punctuation, which is valid. That this can be punctuated differently to emphasize the today and the kingdom will come. All of those things are valid. I want to take you, however, to two scholars who are not from our community of faith. I don't know what denominational confession is theirs. But what they say is worth careful consideration. The first is New Testament scholar Robert Stein, who writes this: to the criminal's vague when, in other words, when you come into your kingdom, to the criminal's vague when, Jesus responded with a precise today, referring less to within the next 24 hours or before the sun goes down, than to the realization of Jesus' reign through his death, resurrection, and ascension. This day, through Jesus' death, salvation was being achieved, and the criminal would share in it. As a result, even though this took place temporally that day, Luke's today belongs more to theology than to chronology. Don't miss that line. The statement of today, says Stein, belongs more to theology than to chronology. What is the theology? I want to read to you, first with some commentary, New Testament scholar Carla Swafford Works, who reminds us that in Luke's gospel, the concept of today is an important concept. It's a concept that speaks to the inbreaking of God's kingdom in the here and now through what Jesus does. It gets repeated in Luke's gospel. Jesus' appearance is accompanied by the angelic announcement that says, today there is born to you in the city of David a Savior. Jesus' inaugural address in the Nazareth synagogue reads from the scroll of the prophet Isaiah and then is followed by Jesus saying, today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Jesus' miracle of the man let down by the ropes, healed of his paralysis, is accompanied by people staggering out saying, we have seen strange things today. Jesus' encounter with Zacchaeus is twice bracketed by that word. First, looking up into the branches of the tree and saying, today I must eat at your house. And then standing in the home of Zacchaeus saying, today salvation has come to this house. So we go back now to Swafford Works, who writes, again, not of our communion of faith. Jesus' response to the criminal is often interpreted as the criminal's hope when he dies. The problem with relegating this hope to the afterlife is that it misses the urgency of today. The author of Luke is fond of noting that God's kingdom has invaded today. Paradise is God's creation restored when God has rectified the world. In Luke's gospel, God's kingdom has invaded today. Today, this criminal experiences God's kingdom because he sees who Jesus really is. Jesus is salvation. Jesus is restoration. And in him, this criminal places hope today. Could it be that what Jesus is saying to this man might be something like this? If today, when all seems lost, you can still believe in hope. If today, when the stench of death fouls the air, you can believe in a restored creation of beauty. If today, when I wear a crown of thorns, you can believe that I will wear the crown of the King. If today, when Rome seems to have conquered, you can still believe that my kingdom will come. If today, when all are hopeless, you nevertheless have hope, if today, on the day of my apparent total defeat, you still believe I have a kingdom, I guarantee you, you will be in my kingdom. I give you my word today. On the day of ultimate defeat, if you believe now, then today the kingdom has come in your life. So what does God say to our shame? Not when we've fumbled the ball, but when we've blown the season. Not when it's a slip up, but a blow up. Not when we've hurt someone's feelings, but when we have damaged someone's life. What does God say to us when the Mongolian peasant haunts our dreams? I think this anonymous thief tells us. And I think he speaks to every single one of us. Every one of us has been there at some point in our lives when it seems we're hanging by a fraying thread. When we've made a disaster of our lives, our marriages, our families. Our career is tanking. Our name and reputation has been soiled. We're trying to hide an addiction. How do we cook the family books to cover up the gambling? How do we deal with the computer to cover up the porn? How do we deal with the fact that I'm addicted to substances and everything is caving in? I have nothing left. I'm here looking good from the outside, but inside, almost nothing left. What does God say? If that criminal could stand here today, I think he would have a very specific statement. It's a statement that I draw from a sermon that I heard years ago. Not entirely sure who preached it. I had it down to about 2 or 3 people this week, but just not sure. When I say years ago, I mean years ago. Before I met this beautiful young woman up here that shares my life, that's how many years ago. But somehow this statement lodged itself in my mind. Also accompanied with a thought I had at the time when I heard it, whoever it was preaching it. I thought, this has nothing to do with the text he's preaching. But wow, it's a beautiful thought. I borrow that line. Because I think this criminal, who had hours, moments left, would speak to every one of us who might be struggling with shame and feel like you've made a disaster of life and that there's nothing left. I think he would say, here is what God says to your shame. Jesus wants what's left. Jesus will take what's left. It might be 2 hours, half hour, 10 minutes, like I had. Nothing left. I can't go give my testimony. I can't serve the church. I can't live a life of... I can do nothing because there's nothing left. And he took that and in its place gave me life and hope. He would speak to you. He would say to you, Jesus wants what's left. You'll take what's left. You never know what he'll do with it. Could he stand here from today's perspective? He would in awe say, somehow God took a criminal with almost no time left, took what I had left, and has used my story to give hope to untold millions. And my name is not even known. What does God say to our shame? God says, I'll take whatever. You say nothing left, give it to me. I'll take it. And I will give you eternity and joy in return. Member of our congregation Dick Osborne, wrote a beautiful article some years ago in Review about the thankfulness of the anonymous. In that article, he quoted a prayer from a woman about the role the anonymous, people like you and me, people like the thief, play. The prayer is asking for God's blessing on all the anonymous people who do work that will never be seen or known, but that result in great blessing. Here's the prayer. For those who paint the underside of the boat, for makers of ornamental drains on roofs too high to be seen, for cobblers who labor over inner souls, for seamstresses who stitch the wrong side of linings, for scholars whose research leads to no obvious discovery, for dentists who polish each gold surface of the fillings of upper molars, for sewer engineers and those who repair water mains, for electricians, for artists who suppress what does injustice to their visions, for surgeons whose sutures are things of beauty, for all those whose work is for your eyes only, who labor for your entertainment or their own, who sleep in peace or do not sleep in peace, knowing that their effects are unknown. Protect them from downheartedness and from diseases of the eye, meaning when they can't see reality as it is. Grant them perseverance for the sake of your love, which is humble, invisible, and heedless of reward. What a prayer. To which I would add only 2 lines. For the one, the thief, who showed the deeply broken the path to life. May you bless him, Father, who showed us that Jesus wants what's left. Gracious God, somebody has come to worship this morning feeling like there's nothing of value left. It's all caved in, and recognizing that much of it has come from their own choices. Lord, please, might your Spirit speak to that person today and remind them that sometimes it takes an anonymous thief to show us the way to the pearl of great price. In Jesus' name, amen.